Hi everybody, Nick here from Creation Army TV. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite effects you can do in Illustrator, and that is blending. You can do a blend very easily in Illustrator, and what a blend is Illustrator doing in between drawings, in between objects that you draw. A good example of a blend is what I have in front of me. I drew the original square on the left using the rectangle tool, and then the object over on the right looks like a red circle, but it's actually a red square with a rounded corners effect applied. You can see my appearance palette here in the top right hand corner shows that I have a round corners effect on there. But all of the objects in between are created with a blend. I didn't draw any of these at all. In fact, if you look at the wireframe view, they're not even there at all. All you see is the original square, which I made first on the left, and the second square, which is identical in size, over on the right. So what's going on here? Well, blending has been around in Illustrator since I think the very first version back in 1994. And what blending lets you do is draw one object and draw another, and then use the blend effect. And there is actually a blend tool in the palette. It's right here under the eyedropper. And Illustrator will go ahead and fill in the gaps, fill in whatever differences might happen in between these two objects will actually be transitioned with a blend. So you can see, as I zoom in here, let's look at the left side. Not only is the color changing, the color is slowly transitioning evenly over to from the blue to the red, but also you can see that the corners of the square are getting rounder and rounder and rounder until finally it's completely round and it looks like a circle on the other side. So any attribute of an object in a blend will be changed. Here we're looking at a change in color and rounded corners, and of course a change in position. And all of those things here are transitioned by this blend. You can touch a blend and you'll see your original two objects. Sorry, let me put this on the artwork layer. But you'll also notice that there is this line in between them. What is this line here? This line in Illustrator terms is called a spine. And a spine is the path, or the sort of invisible path that the blend travels on. I've arced it here for demonstration purposes, but when you make a blend, let's make one exactly like this one above. When you make a blend, by default, your spines will always be straight. So you make your first square, I'll just make it right here, and I will transition to this other square over here, and let's just change color. I won't worry about rounding corners. But to make a blend, take your two objects and go up to the object menu in Illustrator, come down to blend, and then hit make. I've changed my keyboard shortcuts, so please don't go by these. I encourage you to change your keyboard shortcuts to whatever works for you. I blend all the time, so I put them on easy to remember keyboard shortcuts. But I'm going to hit blend make. You have to have these two root objects selected, and you have to have at least two. You can have more if you want to, but for this video we'll just be talking about two. And I'll just hit make. So what's going to happen here? Look at what we have. We have something that looks completely different. This looks like a gradient. This looks like we're going from blue, and we're kind of passing through purple, and we're going to red. And it looks just like I made a long square and I applied, a gradient to it that went across. And that's not actually what's happening. If I zoom in here, you can start to see some of the banding. Sometimes you can see it. There's some banding here on the left side. But what's actually happening here is, by default, Illustrator will make what's called a smooth color gradient. So how do we fix this? Once we have our blend made, we've got our root objects 1 and 2, and then of course the spine is here on the left. How do we change this to make it look more like what's going on up above here? I don't need a gradient. What I need is steps in between. You go ahead and select your blend like I have it here. Go back up to the object menu, blend. Again, we're not going to make a blend this time. You can release it here if you're not happy with your blend. But if you just come down to blend options, this little option right here, then a dialog box will open and it will ask you what you want to do with your blend. So there's three types of blends. There's smooth color, which is what we're looking at here. These look like gradients most of the time. The next one down is specified steps, and then after that is specified distance. I usually go with specified steps to get a certain number, and I'll hit preview. Nothing happens when I just click preview, but you can see that Illustrator is automatically separating this blend into 223 steps. We have our original and our end, so that's 1 and 2, and in between here there are 223 transitions, unlike up above where there's probably 8. So to change this, you would just dial in a number. I'll just type 8 and hit tab. The reason I hit tab is to keep this dialog box open. If I hit enter, this would go away. And the last thing that you see here before OK and cancel is something called orientation. And it shows you a diagram of a simple blend. And there are two modes here. By default, it's set to align to page. So your objects will sort of stay the way that they'll stay in the orientation that you originally drew them, even if you bend the spine. Like this blend example up above has a bent spine, but the original objects stay as they were originally drawn. And so do all the transitions. They don't, in other words, they don't arc. Only the spine arcs, not the objects. But if you click align to path, then your objects will actually bend. And I'll show that in a second. So I'm just going to leave it like this, and I'll hit OK. So now we can see what's happening. I'll go to wireframe, and we've got square number 1, square number 2, and the spine in between. So it's really very simple to set up a blend, and the great thing is, using A on a keyboard or direct select, you can still move things around freely if you want to. So if you're not happy with where this is, you can always move it. And be aware that I drew this red square second, so it is actually above the blue square. So if I move it over and I keep moving and moving and moving, you'll see it eventually start to, collide with the blend objects. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you want to actually show a blend sort of, like in this fashion or something happening like that. So what else can you do with the blend? Well, you can rotate one of the objects, and the rotation gets greater and greater and greater as you go down the line. You can also bring down the opacity on, I'll do it on this red square, and the opacity will transition as well. So this first square is still 100% opacity, but as we get to the next one and the next one and so on, we transition opacity. I'm going to bring that back up so we can see it. Like I did before on this example, you can add an effect to one of them. Let's say I'll click path here, and I'll use effects, stylize round corners, and I'll hit maybe 40 points. And so now this rectangle has very rounded corners. I'll maybe bring that down a little bit. So it's still a rounded rectangle, but you can see that that effect is now transitioning. And notice that I did not have to apply that effect to the first item. The first item just doesn't have it at all. But Illustrator is smart enough to transition it into an object that does have that effect. All right. I can also, if I want to, I can add a stroke to the final object. My first object doesn't get one. This blue square has no stroke still. But the very first transition item does start to show a very thin hairline stroke. So be aware of that. They basically will, all your transition items here in the middle will all have that stroke to mimic the final object. So let's talk about what's going on here with the bent spine. To bend a spine, just remember that a spine is just an invisible line that you can manipulate like any other line segment in Illustrator. So to achieve the effect that I had up here, what I do is you can select the entire blend if you want to, and of course the spine lights up. It's this straight line here in the middle. I'm gonna put this on the artwork layer. And at any time, if you use your, it's near the pen tool. It's the anchor point anchor point tool, which is Shift C, this helps you bend lines. So as I hover over it, you'll see that the symbol changes to a little line segment bender. You can do it this way. You know, you can just bend your line up, and there you go. You have a bent spine, and your bent spine now has two handlers. I'll undo one time. You can also manipulate just one end and add handlers to one end, but you'll notice that things get bunched over onto one side of the blend. Things aren't evenly distributed. So to fix that, you do have to click over here and actually pull this handler out. So whatever influence is being pulled by these tangents, by these handlers, does actually influence the spacing of objects on the blend. So be aware of that. And that's how I basically bent this blend so that it sort of arcs upwards. I'm going to bring up blend options again because I briefly talked about, let me delete this, and we'll make a new blend on the artwork layer. All right, I'll dupe this over here, make it red. Sorry, red fill. And we'll do a blend. Again, I have a keyboard shortcut for that. And then I'll bring up my blend options. I'll go with specified steps. I want 8 steps in preview. And I'll separate these a little bit. And now we're going to try this orientation, which is aligned path. So I'll hit that, and we'll hit OK. I'm going to move this over a little and this out a little bit too. So now I'll bend the spine, and you'll see with Shift C, you'll see that the items actually tilt, including my first and last. This can be helpful if you're, drawing a certain type of maybe dashed line, or I don't know what kind of transition, maybe a white picket fence or something like that, and you've got one item of you've got one picket over on this side, and then you make your other one over here. You blend them so you have however many transition pieces you need, and then you bend it up, and you've got your nice picket fence. It looks like it lives on a cartoon hill, and it's arced. So this can be helpful, but just do be aware that it will actually shift your original items. It will actually turn them. So it's not like an effect that you can change in the appearance palette. It is something that if you do want these to be straight, you do have to straighten it out with the rotate tool by hand. So just be aware of that. So anyway, blending is great, and you can blend pretty much any value: color, stroke, opacity, size. I can even make this bigger if I want to, and the transition occurs as you see it here. So very quickly, go ahead and do anything you want to with blends. They're very useful, and I use them all the time in my drawings. Let's go down a little bit to this artboard, and let's talk about a text blend. In one of my other videos about appearance, I made text with complex appearance. I made a piece of text that said awesome, and I put several fills on it, and at one point I moved those fills down in space and made them smaller, and it looked like we had what looked like an extrusion. You can achieve that sort of same thing with blending, and it's more editable than something you can do with the appearance palette. To give you an example, I'll start with this text object. You can just write anything you want to, and then I'll just duplicate it over here. This object is newer, so it's actually above this one. I'll show you in the layers palette. So I'm actually going to put it below. Layer order is important with blends. So this will be my first text object, and this will be my second. I will make both of them this swatch of black so that I can use the color slider here to make them gray. I'm going to make this one gray just so that we can see a difference between the two. Now I'll take both objects and I'll apply a blend. Blend, make. Alright, so now there's just one object in between, and it looks kind of weird. So I don't know why, but Illustrator only makes these kinds of blends with text, but when you make two objects, it seems to want to make smooth color blends. So you can see the difference there. So just be aware that whenever you make a blend, you're probably immediately going to have to go into your blend options. So that's why I have handy keyboard shortcuts. I'll hit blend options, And even though it says smooth color, we're not on smooth color. I want specified steps, and I'll do like 20, let's say. I'll leave this as is, and I'll hit preview. So this is what we have if I do 20 steps. We've got our original and our back object with 20 copies in between. There are actually 22 text objects here. Be aware of that. I'll hit OK. Even though this looks weird and unreadable, we're gonna go with it because I want to show you what blends can do. The great thing is, like I said before when I was showing you those squares, is that you can still individually manipulate the objects within a blend without going to your appearance palette, without doing much work within the layers palette. But right here on the artboard, if you go, oh, this extrusion is in the wrong place and it looks wrong, you can move it up to wherever you want it by using direct select. You notice that my arrow is white. You do have to use direct select. If you use a regular arrow, the V selection tool, then you'll move the entire blend as one, and you won't be able to isolate individuals. So just hit A on your keyboard to direct select and choose this text object, and you can move it to wherever you want to. Move it up, move it closer. So now my blend is actually making a little bit more sense, and it looks it looks more readable. There we go. You can achieve this type of look where it looks like the text is sort of blending off into fog or something, it looks like it's 3D going into Z space. You can achieve this pretty easily with a blend. And now you don't have to just position your text back here. You can actually I'm going to actually lock the top object because I only want to manipulate the back one. And I did that with the layers palette. I'll do a whole video on the layers palette. So I want my back object to, let's say, be smaller, as if it's it looks like as if it's farther away from us. So you can achieve this sort of transition to backward in space pretty easily by shrinking it and then just kind of pushing it off to the side. I will also take the opacity down to maybe 10%. And now my text from the front blends back into Z space or away from us, and it also kind of disappears. So there's all kinds of cool stuff you can do with this. Already also what I'm seeing here is it looks like the black text has like a shadow. So let's play around a little bit with that, and then I'll show you the last thing you can do with blends, which is really cool. I will go up to Object, Blend, Release, and now we have just our two objects again. And notice that the spine is left over in the layers palette. You can't see it in the artboard unless you make a selection like this. This was the old spine, and sometimes you do need to retain those. So Illustrator, when you break apart a blend, will actually give you this spine as a leftover thing, but I don't want it. I'm just going to select here in the layers palette and delete it. So it's gone now. Okay, so I have my text object here. Let's give it a quick graphic style, appearance. I'll give it one fill of black, and I'll turn it white, and then I'll give it another fill below that. I'll also make that black, full black, and I'll use offset path to, there we go, to make it visible. So now it's pushed out a little bit. So, sometimes your client will want your, what's very popular in graphic design now is to make a text object or a button look like it has a short shadow, as if it's sitting on a surface or a wall and we're looking directly at it, but the sunlight or the object's main light is off to one side and it's casting a shadow. So let's see, maybe I'll make a pretty background first. I'll shove this below. I'll make this rectangle blue, and I'll just lock it. Maybe excuse me, give it a gradient. Give it a little gradient look. I'll take this slider, change the color, make it radial. And I'll make it radiate out from there. So that's as if our light is in the top left. Imagine like the sunlight coming in or something. I'll just lock this background. I know I made a fancy appearance here for text blend, but I'm actually going to eliminate that, and I'll just make my text. I hit D on the keyboard, or to go to this default graphic style, and I'll just make white text. You have to shove your fill above your characters in the appearance palette. So there's text blend. All right, so there's my first object. I'm not actually going to blend this object. I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to turn this object black. This will be the first object in a virtual shadow, and then I'll duplicate this over here, and it doesn't matter where because you can always change it easily later. And this will be the second object in my blend. Remember that the object that I just made is above this other one here, so I'm actually going to push it below. And this object is going to be the end of my shadow. Let's say it's shoved over here a little bit more. It's the end of my shadow. This is where the shadow diffuses or disperses and is no longer visible. So I'm going to take this object and lower the opacity to 0. All right, it's still there. It's just not visible. So I'll take these two objects and make them into a shadow by making them into a blend. I'll use blend make. All right, and again we have that weird, one-step blend, but I'll immediately go into my blend options and look for a specified step, blend, and I'll dial in like 40 steps. So there's kind of a strange looking shadow. Now I'll just push it up right now and align it with the object above. And remember that our white text here, and I like to give things names, white text is not showing because it's below the blend. I'll push it above and I'll lock it. Okay, so now we have something that sort of looks like a shadow. It's not very convincing yet. You can take that first object in the blend, which is this object right here, it's black text, and you can lower that object's opacity to maybe 25. And now we're getting something that's looking a little bit more convincing. You can still see the blend steps here. 1, 2, 3, 4, all 42 of them. All right, I'm zooming out. Notice that your redraw will slow down because Illustrator does have to think about 42 objects now. But let's make this a little bit more convincing. Shadows usually aren't straight black, especially if it falls on this color. So what I'm going to do is select both of the blend objects, and instead of using black, I'll use the actual blue from the wall, and I'll explain why in a minute. And the other object, which I'll direct select here, I'll make that blue as well. And my shadow seems to sort of disappear in a weird way now, but if you take your entire blend and change the transparency mode to multiply, now it'll fall on the wall as a more convincing shadow. And you can see here that in the appearance palette, it is now reading out that I'm selecting a blend and the opacity mode is multiply. Just note that anything you touch will be summarized here in the appearance palette. Okay, so now we have a more convincing shadow if we sort of look at it from far away. I think maybe the first object in the blend, which is at 25% opacity, could maybe be 45. I'm sort of guessing as I go. And also, sometimes shadows are not completely crisp and sharp like this one is here. So what I'll do is I will take the final object in the blend, which is far away from my original object, and I will give it a Gaussian blur. So I'll touch the entire object here in the appearance palette. I'll use effects, blur, and Gaussian blur, and I'll hit preview. And what's happening is you give it a second to redraw. The final object is blurred, and so are some of the transition objects, but the original object, which lives right back here behind the white text, is not blurred at all. It's still sharp. So this gives you a much more convincing shadow effect. And if we sort of step away and look at this, it does look like the letters, the white letters text blend, are sort of a three-dimensional object on this blue wall, and they're casting a shadow. So this is a great way to achieve some of these fake shadows, which are very popular now on a lot of websites. One last thing that I like to do when I'm making a shadow is I like to take the final object and actually increase its size a little bit versus the first object, and what that does is it makes the shadow look like it's sort of being projected and dispersed a little bit more. So I encourage you to go ahead and experiment with this, and you'll be surprised at some of the effects that you can achieve. I'm going to save the last bit of this, which is blending 3D objects, for another video which I'll make very shortly. But for now, I've been Nick Cortez for Creation Army, and thank you very much for watching. We'll see you very soon.